It is roughly 10,000 years ago. The sun has gone down over a small settlement in what is now the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. The grain stores are full. The day's work is done, and somewhere between 20 and 50 ancient humans are gathered around a fire that is throwing a warm orange light across faces that are, if we are being completely honest, having a genuinely good time. Someone is playing something that produces rhythmic sound. Someone else is telling a story that is making people laugh. There is a fermented grain drink being passed around in a clay vessel that is doing exactly what fermented grain drinks have always done to human beings who consume them, which is to say that everyone's opinions are getting louder, and the dancing has started earlier than usual. And at the edge of the firelight, just outside the warm circle where the humans are gathered, a pair of eyes are watching, small, yellow, completely still, belonging to a creature that has absolutely no business being this close to a group of large primates who technically it should be treating as a threat. But the smell coming from this settlement is extraordinary. There are grain stores that the grain stores have attracted mice. The mice are everywhere, and for a small, highly efficient predator with a very specific set of skills, this is not a threat environment. This is a buffet. The cat, a North African wildcat, Felis Silvestris Lybica, looking almost identical to a modern tabby, except for the rather more intense expression and the complete absence of any interest in being affectionate toward anyone, sits in the dark just beyond the firelight and considers the situation. The humans are loud and distracted and moving unpredictably, which is normally a reason to leave. But the mice are right there. So many mice. And the humans don't seem to be coming toward it. So the cat stays, and in that moment, a small wildcat sitting at the edge of a noisy ancient human gathering, calculating that the food was worth the proximity. The longest and most one-sided domestication process in the history of human-animal relationships quietly began. Today we are going into the full story of how wildcats became ancient human companions, why it happened when it did and not before, what the ancient human nightlife that made it possible actually looked like, and what the relationship between cats and ancient humans reveals about both species in ways that are alternately fascinating, funny, and genuinely surprising. This one has everything. Let's go. Before we get to the cats, we need to spend a moment on the ancient humans, because the specific version of ancient human life that enabled cat domestication was different from everything that came before it, and that difference is what made the whole thing possible. For the vast majority of human existence, the hundreds of thousands of years when ancient humans were fully mobile hunter-gatherers, moving constantly across the landscape, the conditions for cat domestication simply didn't exist. Not because ancient humans and wild cats didn't encounter each other. They absolutely did. Wild cats were present across the African and Eurasian landscapes that ancient humans moved through, and encounters between the species were not rare. But a mobile hunter-gatherer band has nothing to offer a wildcat in particular. Hunter-gatherers don't accumulate grain. They don't store food in large quantities in fixed locations. They don't create the specific ecological conditions. Large stationary concentrations of calorie-dense food that attract rodents in numbers large enough to make staying in one place worthwhile for a predator. Mobile humans and wild cats shared landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years, and nothing happened domestication-wise because neither species was offering the other anything specific enough to change the relationship. Then, ancient humans discovered something that changed everything, not just for cats, for the entire trajectory of human civilization. And they discovered that if you planted seeds in the ground and stayed near them, food came out of the ground. And if you stored that food in large quantities, you could eat through seasons when nothing was growing. And if you did this consistently, you didn't have to move anymore. Agriculture, the single development that transformed ancient human life more completely than anything else in our evolutionary history, producing consequences that are still playing out today. And among those consequences, in a small but genuinely delightful way, was cats. Here is what the new settled agricultural lifestyle created that changed the cat situation permanently. Grain stores. large, stationary, concentrated deposits of calorie-dense food that were impossible to hide and impossible to protect completely. Ancient humans in the first agricultural settlements were storing grain in clay vessels and pits and purpose-built structures, and those stores attracted mice and rats in numbers that would make a modern pest control professional weep quietly into their clipboard. Rodents are exceptionally good at finding food. They are also exceptionally good at reproducing, which means that once they found the grain stores, they didn't find them in small numbers for long. An early agricultural settlement with a few seasons of accumulated grain was a rodent paradise. The grain disappeared into small teeth. The grain was contaminated. The grain that ancient humans had worked an entire season to accumulate was being destroyed faster than it could be secured. This was not a minor problem. This was an existential threat to the entire agricultural project. If you cannot store food between seasons, the agricultural lifestyle doesn't work. The grain stores were foundational, and they were being eaten. Enter the cat, wild North African wildcats, the species that genetic analysis confirms is the ancestor of every domestic cat alive today, are extraordinarily efficient small rodent hunters. They are built for it at every level. The retractable claws, the binocular vision calibrated for tracking fast-moving small prey, the explosive short-range acceleration, the patience for extended stalking and complete stillness, and the specific prey drive that makes killing mice not just possible, but compulsive. A wild cat in a grain store full of mice was not making a conscious professional decision. It was doing exactly what its entire evolutionary history had prepared it to do with maximum enthusiasm. The ancient humans noticed. Of course, they noticed because what was happening near their grain stores was that the mice were disappearing. The rodent problem that was threatening their food supply was being solved quietly and efficiently by a small animal that wanted nothing from them except access to the mice. This is the moment that their relationship changed, not because ancient humans decided to domesticate cats, not because someone caught a wild kitten and decided to raise it, but because ancient humans looked at what the wild cats were doing near their settlements and made a very practical calculation. This is useful. Don't drive them away. That decision to tolerate rather than chase away the wild cats at the edge of the settlement was the beginning of everything, and it was, in the most technical sense, not domestication at all. It was something researchers call commensalism, two species living in proximity, and one of them benefiting from the relationship without the other being significantly harmed or significantly helped beyond tolerance. The cats ate the mice, the ancient humans kept their grain, nobody was controlling anybody's breeding, nobody was selecting for particular traits, the cats were still wild, they were just wild in increasingly close proximity to humans who had stopped throwing things at them. Now, here is where the ancient human Nightlife becomes directly relevant to this story, and this is the part that nobody connects to cat domestication, but that makes complete sense once you see it. Research on the social lives of modern hunter-gatherer communities, including the Jew Juan Bushman of Botswana and Namibia, who were studied extensively by anthropologist Polly Wiesner, reveals that ancient human nighttime behavior was dramatically different from their daytime behavior and that the campfire was the social center of ancient community life. Wiener found that while 75% of daytime conversations centered on practical economic matters and social regulation, nighttime firelit gatherings were dominated by singing, storytelling, dancing, and what she described as enthralling social narratives. More than 80% of nighttime conversations were non-practical in nature. In plain language, ancient humans partied at night, not in the modern sense of nightclubs and expensive drinks and questionable music choices, but in the genuinely social, genuinely celebratory sense of people gathering around a fire after the day's work was done, making noise, telling stories, enjoying each other's company, and in the first agricultural communities, consuming fermented grain beverages that made all of the above significantly more enthusiastic. At Gobichipi, a site in what is now modern-day Turkey, hunter-gatherers convened regularly throughout the 10th to 8th millennia BCE to feast on gazelles, build enormous limestone structures, and engage in what evidence suggests were large communal gatherings, probably while lubricated with beer. The evidence for fermented beverage consumption in early agricultural and late hunter-gatherer communities is substantial. Archaeological evidence from Roquette Cave in Israel, dating to roughly 13,000 years ago, found fermented beverage storage in stone mortars, suggesting that brewing activity was occurring even before the full transition to settled agriculture. Ancient humans were drinking fermented beverages, gathering around fires, making noise, telling stories, and generally creating the specific conditions: warmth, light, food smells, relative safety and numbers, reduced threat response from the group members that made the edge of the settlement the most interesting place in the landscape at night. And the cats noticed the firelight attracted insects, the insects attracted small mammals, the small mammals attracted cats. The noise and movement of the human gathering kept predators that might otherwise prey on the cats at a distance. The food smells and the grain stores meant mice were abundant nearby. From a wild cat's perspective, the edge of an ancient human nighttime gathering was almost perfectly optimized for a hunting opportunity in relatively safe conditions. Night after night, the cats came closer, not because they were becoming domesticated, not because they were developing affection for humans, because the humans' nighttime social life was creating a predictable, safe, prey-rich environment at the edge of their settlement that a smart predator with good night vision and no particular fear of human noise was ideally positioned to exploit. Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting and where the specific direction of the cat-human relationship becomes clearer. The cats were selecting themselves for tolerance of human proximity. This is not how most domestication stories work. Dogs were domesticated through a long process of active human selection, choosing which individuals to breed, selecting for traits that made them useful for hunting, hearing, or companionship. Horses, cattle, sheep, goats, all domesticated through active human management of breeding over generations. Cats did something different. Ancient humans did not select them, they selected themselves. The specific wild cats that were willing to tolerate human proximity and noise, that had, through individual temperamental variation, lower anxiety responses to human presence, were the ones that stayed near the settlements and accessed the mouser food environment. The ones with higher fear responses fled at the first sign of humans and went back to hunting in the wild. Over generations, the population of cats living near human settlements gradually shifted toward individuals with lower inherent fear of humans, because those were the individuals who stayed reproduced in the settlement environment and passed their temperamental traits to offspring who were born into the settlement context rather than the wild. This process, called self-domestication, produced cats that were genetically and behaviorally different from their wild counterparts without any deliberate human intervention in breeding. The ancient humans didn't breed the cats. The situation bred them. The grain stores and the mice and the noisy nighttime fires and the general tolerance of the settlement community for the small animals at the edge of the light created a selection pressure for tameness that operated over thousands of years without anyone planning it. This is why cats are different from every other domesticated animal. Dogs were shaped by humans, cattle were shaped by humans, cats were shaped by mice and grain and firelight and the specific social conditions of the first agricultural settlements. They came to us on their own terms, and they have been maintaining that position ever since. Let's talk about the specific moment when the relationship shifted from mutual tolerance to something more recognizable as the human-cat dynamic that still exists today. The answer is almost certainly children. Ancient human settlements had children in them, and ancient children behaved toward wild animals the way children have always behaved toward wild animals, with immediate, enthusiastic completely non-threatening interest. A child approaching a semi-tamed wildcat at the edge of the settlement was not a predator. It was not a threat. It was a small, slow-moving, high-pitched creature that was clearly fascinated rather than aggressive. Wild kittens born in or near the settlement context, raised with regular exposure to human sounds and human presence from birth, would have imprinted on that environment as normal. A kitten that grows up hearing human voices, watching human movements, smelling human food, is a fundamentally different animal in terms of fear response than a kitten raised in the wild. And a child who found a settlement-born kitten was doing what children do, picking it up, playing with it, feeding it scraps, creating the specific context of prolonged physical contact and positive association between a young human and a young cat that slowly produced something that looked much more like domestication. This is most likely how the relationship went from commensal to companion, not through deliberate breeding programs, not through adult human decisions about cat utility, through children and kittens doing what children and kittens do when they encounter each other in a relatively safe environment with food nearby. The oldest direct archaeological evidence of a human-cat relationship that goes beyond commensal proximity is the burial site at Chilocampos in Cyprus, dating to approximately 9,500 years ago. A cat was buried alongside a human in what appears to be a deliberate, careful interment. The cat curled on its side near the human body. Cyprus had no native wildcats, which means this cat was brought to the island deliberately by humans. Someone valued this cat enough to transport it across open water to a new settlement. Someone cared about this cat specifically. That is not a commensal relationship. That is a companion relationship. That is, in every meaningful sense, a pet. 9,500 years ago on an island, someone missed their cat enough that when they died, they wanted the cat buried with them. Nothing has fundamentally changed. Here's the detail about cat domestication that genuinely delights everyone who encounters it for the first time. And it says something important about the entire domestication story. Cats are not fully domesticated, not in the biological sense that dogs or cattle are domesticated. The genetic and morphological differences between a domestic cat and its wild ancestor Felis Silvestris Lybica are remarkably small. Researchers have noted that the domestication process has seemingly not profoundly altered the morphological, physiological, behavioral, and ecological features of cats, in stark contrast to what happened with dogs. A domestic cat and a North African wildcat look almost identical from the outside. Their skeletons are virtually indistinguishable. Their basic behavioral repertoire, hunting, territorial marking, solitary activity patterns, independence remains essentially wild. What changed was primarily social tolerance. Domestic cats learn to tolerate and in many cases seek out human company. They develop the specific communication behaviors. The meow, which adult wild cats almost never use with each other, but which domestic cats deploy constantly toward humans, apparently having learned that humans respond to it, that make them effective at extracting resources from people. They became capable of genuine attachment to specific individuals, but they did not become dependent. A domestic dog returned to the wild has low survival prospects. It has been shaped over thousands of years of active human selection into an animal that needs human structure to function. A domestic cat returned to the wild does not struggle meaningfully. It hunts. It marks territory. It manages. The cat is in the relationship not because it has been reshaped by domestication into dependency, but because the relationship offers something it finds worthwhile. This distinction between the dog who needs humans and the cat who chooses humans is not a modern observation. It was baked into the relationship from the very beginning. Ancient humans did not create cats that needed them. They created an environment that cats chose to inhabit. That has been the dynamic ever since. Here is the perspective that ties everything together. The story of how wildcats became ancient human companions is not a story about human ingenuity or deliberate animal husbandry. It is a story about accidental alignment. Ancient humans needed grain storage. Grain storage created a rodent problem. Rodents attracted wild cats. Ancient humans tolerated the cats because they solved the rodent problem. Ancient human nighttime social life, the fires, the feasting, the noise, the fermented grain beverages, the stories and the dancing, and the general warm chaos of a community gathered in the dark created an environment at the settlement edge that wild cats found worth lingering near. The cats that lingered bred near the settlement. Their offspring were less fearful. Their offspring's offspring were less fearful still. Children played with kittens. Kittens that were played with grew into cats that sought out human contact. Someone who cared about a specific cat died on a Mediterranean island 9,500 years ago and was buried with that cat because the relationship had become something real. And somewhere in that long, unplanned, mutually convenient, gradually deepening relationship is the explanation for why there is almost certainly a cat somewhere in your building right now doing approximately whatever it wants with complete confidence that this is correct and appropriate. The cat did not come to us because we invited it. It came because we had mice and a fire and a party going on at the edge of the settlement.